activities, John works closely with VF's corporate and brand sustainability to activate their sustainable material visions. Prior to joining VF Corporation, John worked in various roles within the leather and chemical industries on both technical production and commercial sides of this business. John holds an honorary Bachelor of Science degree in leather technology from Northampton University. So I will go on with Zach Angelini, and he is manager of environmental stewardship at Timberland. In this role, Zach leads the development and implementation of Timberland's global product sustainability strategy, setting public-facing goals and driving internal processes. Zach also develops and manages strategic partnerships with NGOs and manages strategic material suppliers that enable Timberland to pilot environmental product innovations. Zach participates in industry-wide organizations. He also shares the company's challenges to solve sustainability issues across the industry. Prior to joining Timberland, Zach worked for international government and non-profit organizations. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Environmental Engineering and Master of Science degree in Civil Engineering from the University of New Hampshire. And there, he concentrated his studies on life cycle assessment. So I kindly give the words to John Hopper and Zach Angelini. Please and thank you.
Ezrin, thank you.
Okay.
Zach, do you want to go to the next slide?
Yep. There we go.
Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. Ezrin, thank you for the introduction. In these first few slides, I'm just going to run through a little bit of an introduction about VF, who we are, because many people will know VF's brands, such as Timberland, Vans, and the North Face being the three largest, but they may not know VF. So VF is one of the world's largest apparel and footwear companies. It has a diverse portfolio of brands that are all focused in the lifestyle, outdoor, and experience space. So the brands that VF have are all about connecting people with their chosen lifestyles. The business is a very purpose-driven business, and we look to really drive success and create value across all of our stakeholders. So, Zach, could you go to the next slide? This is just a quick view of the brands that we have currently in the portfolio. And as you can see, they go from Vans, the North Face, Timberland being the biggest, but we have a whole range of brands that cover the production of everything from footwear and apparel through to travel goods, bags, backpacks, and luggage. So, back to the next slide.
Sorry, there's a little bit of a delay. There we go.
Just a quick overview of the company. The company is about 121 years old, or it is 121 years old. We have around 50,000 associates and a revenue of just under $12 billion. We produce around 400 million pieces of something, whether that's shoes, apparel, bags every year. And so it's a large organization operating in many, many countries around the world. As we said, we're a very purpose-driven business. So our purpose is, and this is the lens through which we make all of our business decisions, is to power movements of sustainable and active lifestyles for the betterment of people and planet. And it's that last part of our purpose that is really leads in, you'll see come into life in some of the things that we'll talk about in this presentation around sustainable materials. And we going to show a short video about why we think that the sustainable materials are so important to us.
An urgent warning tonight from some of the world's top scientists. We still have a chance to limit the effects of climate change and save countless lives, but only if much more is done immediately.
The empathy is us. Like, we are the link that connects us to the natural cycle.
It also says if unprecedented changes are not made and made soon, there will be irreversible damage to the planet.
So I think, you know, the opening shots of that video clearly lay out what's the challenges in front of us as not only as a footwear and apparel industry, but just as a society and a world at large. You know, global warming, pollution, those are real challenges. And as the video asked the question, you know, what are you going to do about it? And this presentation and that we're going to talk about today are some of the things that VF is doing to address and answer that question. What are we going to do about the impact that we have on the world and in all of the societies where we make our product? So Zach, if you can go to the next page. So in December of 2019, we announced that VF was going to launch its science-based targets. It announced its science-based targets. And these are targets that set out goals and targets around climate change, greenhouse gas emissions, and the way that we'll source our materials that VF is committed to reaching. So Zach, can you just go to the next slide? As we see here, these targets are based around the need for us to control climate change, so reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The footwear and the apparel industry has really united behind science-based targets. So this is not something that's unique to VF. There are many, many large brands in the industry that have committed to science-based targets. And all of these companies have aligned that they will reduce their emissions sufficiently to drive to a reduction of a maximum of 1.5 degrees of warming and net zero emissions. So those are the high level targets that we've all set. Science-based targets review and measure the greenhouse gas emissions across all aspects of an organization's operations. So they look at indirect operations as well as direct operations. And the scope of those operations includes where our raw materials come from, how those raw materials are processed, how we transport our finished goods, how we retail our finished goods. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see why it's so important that we look at our scope 3. So scope 3 emissions are all of the emissions that are related to activities conducted by somebody else within our supply chain. So they're activities that are not directly managed by VF, but are related to the people who make our product, the people who make the raw materials. And you can see that 99% of VF's total emissions come from those scope 3 emissions. So the activities of somebody other than VF. And when we break down that 99% of scope 3 emissions, we can see that 42% of those greenhouse gas emissions are related to the materials that we use to make our product. It's not the product assembly, you can see that that's only 9%. It's not transportation of that product, but it's actually the materials that we use to make those products. So it's really critical that we address our raw materials and find those materials, source them more sustainably and get them from more sustainable options. When you look at our materials by the volume that we use, we can see that, you know, polyester, leather, rubber, and cotton represent the 4 largest materials. And with leather, rubber, and cotton all being natural materials, you know, there's an opportunity for us to make real progress in the impact of those products from how and from where we source those materials. And that'll be the focus of Zach's part of the presentation later. So VF's commitment to climate change is a 30% reduction of our greenhouse gas emissions from our 2017 baseline. So what that means is we measured what our greenhouse gas emissions were in 2017, and by 2030, we've committed to reducing those emissions by 30%. So Zach, can you go to the next slide? So what does that mean for us? In the first 2 parts of this graph, you can see what our baseline is. So this is the first column is our 2017 emissions. The second column represents how those emissions will grow based on our expectation of our business growing between 2017 and 2030. The final column on the right-hand side in grey represents where we need to get to. And most importantly, the red bar, the red column represents the gap, the challenge, the problem that we have to solve between now and 2030. And that's part of what it, you know, that's a big part of the work that Zach and I do, is trying to identify with our suppliers, with our material suppliers, how we're going to close that gap. And we're going to close that gap by taking some really bold and ambitious goals and leadership. We've said that 100% of our top 9 materials will be sourced from either regenerative agriculture, responsibly source renewables, or be recycled. So I think for synthetic materials, the concept of recycled polyester, recycled nylon is quite well understood. And so there'll be a focus on moving in that direction. But at the other end of the scale, with natural materials, we really have 2 pillars. One is to get those materials from third-party verified systems and growers, such as Forestry Stewardship Council, if you're talking about products from the forestry industry. That could be Tencel, it could be rayon from a fiber point of view, it's all of our paper products. It will include rubber, because rubber is, you know, natural rubber comes from trees. And then the third pillar, and possibly the most impactful pillar, is to source those natural materials from systems and agricultural systems that are designed to build soil health, improve the nutrient, carbon, and water cycles. So those systems, if you work in those systems also sequester carbon. As they grow trees, as you grow plants, if you grow those plants and trees in the right way, they put carbon into the ground and they lock that carbon in the ground. There is an important definition though. It's not just about growing plants. It's not just about growing trees. It's the process that you use to grow those trees and how you manage that it is critical, because if you do it in the wrong way, you can actually do more harm than you do good. So in order for us to get to those big, bold goals that VF has set for 2030, we've challenged each of our brands to go out and build a roadmap. Obviously, each of our brands make different products. They use different materials. And so we've challenged each of those brands to build a roadmap that will allow them to reach their own targets, develop their own goals that are specific to the journey that they're on, the type of product that they make, and the raw materials that they use. In the next slide, we'll show you an example of the type of goal that we've built up. So this is an example from the Timberland brand, and you can see our baseline, how we expect our emissions to grow, what our target is on the far right-hand side of this slide, and then how we're going to close that target. And within the Timberland brand, they have identified the leather, cotton, and rubber as being their three biggest natural materials. And they've identified the opportunity, if we source those materials from growers and farmers that practice regenerative agriculture, the carbon that those growers are putting into the ground as they grow these products will allow Timberland to reach their 2030 targets. And so that is the process that Timberland is now engaged in, and the announcement that Timberland made around their 2030 regenerative and sustainability goals. So this is an example of one of our roadmaps. Each one of our 20-something brands is developing a roadmap for their own brand, and the strategies that each brand will have will be slightly different, but the target is for each brand is the same. How are they going to achieve their 2030 target of a 30% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions from their baseline that was established in 2017? Right, Zach?
Awesome. Thanks, John.
All
Hi,
right,
everybody.
So Zach, I'll get you take over and go through the Timberland vision, yeah?
Perfect. Thanks, John. Yeah, so building on that really strong foundation that John just went over in terms of VF's sustainable materials strategy and their science-based targets, I'm going to take us through now the goals in the new product innovation vision that Timberland set for 2030, which is really what's going to guide us into the future of our material supply and product creation. So on September 1st, Timberland announced this new product innovation vision, which, as I mentioned, is really what is going to guide our brand into the future. That statement is here, and it reads, "Inspired by nature, Timberland will design net positive products for a greener future, giving back more than we take." So really with this vision, the idea is actually to go beyond the concept of just reducing our emissions and actually be able to sequester more carbon than we actually emit as a company. So when we measure the total amount of carbon that we emit, we want to make sure that we're actually pulling more carbon out of the atmosphere than we're emitting overall. And so this vision is supported by some tactical product sustainability goals. So the first one, the overarching aspiration being for 100% of our products to create that net positive impact on the earth that I just mentioned. And really the way that we're going to get there is through a goal around our materials as well as our designs. So when it comes to materials, the goal is to source 100% of Timberland's natural materials from regenerative agriculture. And when it comes to designs, the goal is for 100% of Timberland's products to be designed for circularity. So as John mentioned, for Timberland, the majority of our top volume materials are natural materials. And so this goal around regenerative agriculture is going to be a major strategy for us to achieve both VF's target as well as our net positive target. So I'll just unpack each of those goals a little bit. So starting with regenerative agriculture, we say that our envision is inspired by nature. And so what we know about nature is that nature is regenerative. The environment possesses this really incredible ability to heal and restore itself, but this happens if and only if humans work in harmony with it. And so that's actually exactly what regenerative farmers do And we're able to support them by expanding our use of natural fibers and then connecting closely with those primary producers in our supply chain to support the use of these regenerative practices. So to understand a bit more about what regenerative practices and what regenerative agriculture is, it's first really important to understand some of the challenges with conventional agriculture, which we laid out here. So one being that conventional agriculture is the top cause of soil degradation globally. It's the top user and polluter of fresh water, and it's one of the top emitters of carbon into the atmosphere. You might have seen news articles like beef is the new SUV, things like that, really highlighting some of these challenges. There's lots of scary statistics out there as well. We pulled some of them here, like 70% of the world's fresh water is used for agriculture, and the Global Water Institute estimates that 700 million people will be displaced by water scarcity by 2030. The United Nations also estimates that 33% of the world's farmable land has been lost in just the last 40 years alone. And they estimate that if that rate of soil loss continues, that there'd only be 60 years of farming left before all of our topsoil is gone, which topsoil is where basically all of the world's food is grown. So some scary statistics and a bit doom and gloom there. But the good news is that converting to regenerative agriculture can actually change all of that and really flip that story on its head. So what regenerative agriculture is basically farming practices that mimic natural processes. It's really this idea, like we laid out in our vision statement, of taking inspiration of nature, looking to nature's logic and using that within our own human systems. And what this does is it helps to restore the environment rather than degrade it, really transitioning agriculture from being this global environmental problem to actually becoming the solution to those very problems. And as John was describing, tactically how this works is farmers are implementing practices that specifically are aimed at drawing carbon out of the atmosphere, where we obviously don't want it, and storing it back in the soil where you actually do want carbon. When you have more carbon in your soil, you have healthier soil, you have more biodiversity, you have better water quality and water holding capacity, and even the potential to get improved crop yields from farmers, reduce inputs and the input costs that farmers have, all while helping to reverse climate change. So it really is this pretty incredible win-win-win solution that is better for the land, better for water, better for wildlife biodiversity, better for farmers, and all while, as I mentioned, reversing climate change. So we have a video here that is just highlighting one of the regenerative projects that we have going on right now. So I'll just play that now. So yeah, that's a project we're really excited about. As the video stated, cotton is really important to our apparel business. And we just kickstarted that project. We'll be funding 250 farmers in India to transition to the regenerative organic certification. And then beyond that, we have several regenerative projects that are already in the works and being activated. Really importantly for us and for Timberland, we're expanding or creating and expanding supply chains for regenerative leather, both in the US and Australia. We launched our first ever regenerative leather boot earlier in October. We're also kickstarting a project to source regenerative rubber in Thailand through smallholder farmers who are using a dynamic agroforestry practice to grow their rubber. We're kickstarting a project in Brazil to source regenerative sugarcane, which will then be used as a bio-additive to our EVA soles in our shoes. And then just like that video mentioned, we have the regenerative organic project in India. We're also exploring regenerative supply chains in Haiti in the US as well for cotton. And really the key to the success for all of these projects is going to be creating deep partnerships with our material suppliers and primary producers to make sure that we can source, process, and convert these regeneratively grown natural materials in the most efficient and sustainable way possible, really with the ultimate goal of creating additional value throughout the value chain. So now moving down to circularity, the second pillar of our sustainability strategy. When we think about circularity as a brand, it's really the combination of these two concepts laid out here. So the first part of circularity is making our products with recycled materials. So this is something that we've been doing for a while. Many of our suppliers are very familiar with, like using recycled plastic bottles to create our fabrics. We're starting to use more waste fabric scraps as the recycled input to our materials. And in the future, looking to expand into actually using post-consumer recycled fabrics as we create our materials. But then it's important to combine this with the idea of designing for recyclability. So when we use those recycled materials, we need to ensure that they're built into our products in a way that maintains their recyclability. So for us, and especially for footwear, this really means designing for disassembly, because right now, typical footwear is basically a monstrous hybrid of materials that can't be efficiently recycled altogether. You really need to be able to separate those materials out in order to efficiently recycle them in their respective recycling streams. So when we combine these two concepts, made with recycled materials and made to be recyclable, that is when we can achieve full circularity. And we have several circular projects in the works as well, just like in regenerative. We launched our first ever products using a new recycled leather material this fall. We're expanding our use of recycled cotton in footwear and apparel, our use of recycled wool. And as I mentioned, we're working on this idea of design for disassembly and recyclability, which will really be how we complete that Timberland circle of life and ensure that these recycled materials can be recycled again at the end of their useful life. So just to wrap up here, this slide is really just showing how these concepts of circularity and regeneration come together to achieve our ultimate goal of net positivity. So through our circular initiatives, that's really where we're looking to minimize the negative impacts that we have as a brand. So reduce the amount of energy that's needed to create our products, reduce the amount of waste that's associated with our products, really heading towards this idea of neutrality. But as a brand, we really strongly believe that neutrality isn't good enough, and we need to aim to have a positive impact on the environment and actually restore the environments that we're sourced from, rather than just degrading them less. And so that's where the idea of regenerative really comes in, where we hope to tip the scales into this area of a positive impact and actually, as I was saying before, draw more carbon out of the atmosphere than we emit and be positive in terms of biodiversity and water quality. And so really it will be with the help of our suppliers that we'll go on this journey together. And so excited as we really move on with this and continue with next steps to achieve these goals. So that is all for me.
So Adrian, that's the end of the presentation. If there's any questions from anybody that's looking that get forwarded to us, we'd be happy to try and answer those questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, John and Zach. It's very nice to hear sustainability effort of the companies. It was really interesting. So, and we can get the questions from our participants if we have.
Hi, everyone.
Yeah, Erkan Zandar, please.
Yeah, hi. Erkan Zandar, the president of the Aegean Exporters Association. So I would like to welcome to our guests for this session. I have followed and it was very interesting. So my question will be, what does your company plan about, or is there any plan about making any corporation in Turkey? Because it's a country that is deeply involved today in sustainability. We have lots of members of Leather Working Group as tanneries, and also as a production plant. So does your company may have any thought about making some corporations in Turkey as well? Thank you.
Zach, maybe I'll take that one. Mr. Zander, thank you for the question. VF Corporation already has a sourcing operation in Turkey that is focused on our apparel business. So we are already sourcing product and materials from Turkey. We see Turkey, the location of Turkey and the capability of its suppliers as being a critical part of our sourcing strategy going forward. So I would expect that our cooperation and interaction in Turkey will continue to grow in the future. Specifically on the leather side, we currently do not source any materials from Turkey. However, we've engaged in a number of conversations in the past with Turkish suppliers. And I think that as we move down this journey, we will be looking at a more diverse supply chain than we have operated with previously. Thus far, the majority of our leather is sourced on hides that originate in the USA. As we look to identify origins of raw material from regenerative growers and farmers, I believe that search will take us into countries beyond the USA. We are already engaged, as Zach said, in conversations in Australia. We also have some conversations in New Zealand, and we would welcome connection with any of your members who feel that their raw material supply chain may fulfill some of the criteria around those suppliers farming in a way that is regenerative and builds soil health. We would absolutely welcome those connections, and we have guidelines that we can present we can supply to people that they can look at, and if they feel they meet those guidelines or would be potentially interested in looking at how they could develop their systems so that they meet those guidelines, absolutely we'd be interested in having those conversations.
Yeah, thank you very much for the answer.
Do we have any question more? So I think it's okay for everyone. So if we have not any question more, we can close the session. Thank you very much, dear John and Zach. It has been very informative and promising for our future. It was a really good presentation. Thank you very much. Also for the participants, thank you very much for attending.
Adrian, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you for coordinating.
Okay, see you. Ciao.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Ciao.